Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. I am so excited to be here today with Keith Giles once again, and I have had him on in the past. So I will link that previous interview in the description where we really talk about Keith's deconstruction journey and how he went through that process. We really get into some interesting topics because he's had a lot of experience with working in the deconstruction community. But today we're actually going to talk about Keith's new book, which is called Sola Mysterium. Is that correct?
Yes, Sola Mysterium, celebrating the beautiful uncertainty of everything.
Yes. So first of all, welcome to the channel, Keith. Thank you for being here.
Melissa, thank you so much. It's a lot of fun to come back and especially to talk about this topic with you.
Yes, and as we were just saying, I just finished reading Keith's book, and what I really love about it is that I feel like it can sort of be like an in-between, like a go-between between the deconstructing Christian community and the New Age community, because he has a Christian background and is able to bring in that Christian voice, and he knows the Bible very well, but also he is at a place in his journey where, I mean, I shouldn't speak for you, but you're talking about topics that are of great interest to the New Age crowd, and you're able to say, here, look, we're talking about the same things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's what, I mean, I'll be honest, I sent this book out before it was published. I sent it out to, my typical circle of friends that are mostly in that kind of deconstructing progressive Christian kind of community. And several of them came back to me and said, not only did they not want to endorse it, one guy actually came back and said to me not to publish it.
Wow.
Because he was like, oh, Keith, this is too dangerous. And you're saying things, that are challenging to a lot of people that are going to, that are Christians and whatever. And I was like, I understand where you're coming from, I guess, but this is where I am. You know what I mean? I don't want to change my book for somebody else's benefit. So I recognize that a lot of people who have read my books up to this point and probably really enjoy what I've been saying, for some of them, hopefully not all of them, but for some of them, this book will be too far for them. They'll be like, well, what are you doing, Keith? I don't know if I can go with you there. And that's okay. I recognize that I'm going to probably leave some people behind, but at the same time, I feel like I'm going to be adding new people who are going to be reading this book and saying, okay, yeah, this makes sense to me. This is where I am too. So this is very much a transitional book, I believe, for where I'm going in the future.
Well, I just want to say that it takes a lot of courage to be true, not only to be true to yourself, but also to speak about that publicly. So thank you for doing that. I know how difficult it can be because I went through that transition where when I started my channel, I was very, very in the Christian Universalist crowd. And then when I started using language that was too New Age, it's, you do lose people, but it's worth it for what you gain, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to be, authentic on that level. Derek Webb is somebody that, he was also a guy who was a Christian musician, and he then eventually became an atheist. And he was very public about that and very honest about that in his lyrics, as well as just in interviews and conversations with people about where he was at in his journey. And I really appreciated that about him. And we interviewed him once for our podcast a couple of years ago, and he was saying that, as a musician, as an artist, and I would say as a writer too, your job is to tell the truth, and your job is to be authentic and real and vulnerable and all that. Like, that's what people usually appreciate about what you do. They don't want you, they don't want to sense in any way that you're being false or fake. And so and you recognize though that sometimes by telling your truth, some people are just going to say, well, that's it. I can't go with you there. And it's like, okay, that's fine. Go find somebody else that is speaking to you for where you are now. But I have to speak to where I am. And I know that means that there's going to be another group of people in the future that are going to resonate. They're going to, they're going to find what I'm doing, and they're going to feel at home with that. So I just feel really strongly about that. And I have to be honest about my journey. So.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And so thank you again for doing that, because it does give the rest of us courage to know that we're not alone in it.
Right.
So I guess let's start with the title of your book.
Mhm.
I know there's a little bit of a story behind that. Do you want to explain what it means?
Yeah. So for people coming from the Christian side of things, they would recognize it's a play on something that Martin Luther, when the Protestant Reformation happened, way back when. And that's when the Protestants broke off from the Catholic Church and became their own separate thing. Martin Luther came up with these 5 solas. So there was Sola Scriptura, which means scripture alone, or Sola Christus, which is Christ alone, Sola Fide, which is faith alone. And there were sort of these 5 sort of pillars, 5 sort of major doctrines that he came up with to say this is what Christianity is all about. So what I'm doing in this title of this book is sort of adding a 6th one, if you will, which was Sola Mysterium, which means only mystery. And in fact, I would even say I would think it's the only sola. it's the sola mysterium. The idea being it's really that when we're talking about God, again, this is about being honest. So much of theology I've noticed is that when people talk about theology, especially from the Christian side of things, they seem to do so with so much confidence and so much certainty. Oh, we know exactly what we're saying. I'm right. I've got this figured out. To the point where even evangelical Christianity in America is pretty much convinced that theology is all about being right. You have to be right about everything. You have to have all the right information about God. But what I want to say and what I'm pointing out in the book is that's an illusion. That's ridiculous. Like nobody can say really anything for certain about God, because God is by definition of being beyond comprehension, beyond our ability to fully grasp. And so if we're going to talk about God, I say this at the beginning of the book, if we're going to talk about God in any way, rather than talk about all that we know about God, which really, if we're honest, it's pretty much nothing. I would shift that around and I would say, why don't we instead, if we're going to talk about God, talk about all that we don't know about God? Because that is closer to the truth. And that is a much more expansive conversation, because we really, if we're honest, would have to say we really don't know very much about God. And there are things we believe, there's things we hope, but we cannot speak about things that we know with any degree of certainty.
Could you share a little bit of your own personal journey on coming to this place? Because you used to be an evangelical pastor, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Very certain, very convinced that it was all about having the right information. Yes. Well, yeah, so part of my journey, and I talked about this last time I was here, I went from that level being really indoctrinated. And again, I've reached a place now where now that I'm on the outside looking back in, I can look back on that and say, yes, a whole lot of evangelical Christianity it's not education, it's indoctrination, right? Education would be if I had been told, there are many ways and there are many certain people throughout history who have believed different things about these certain doctrines, and here's all of them, and you could learn about all of them, and then you can decide for yourself which one you think makes more sense for you. That would be education. Indoctrination is what I experienced, which is I was only ever told one way of thinking about something, only given the verses in the Bible that supported that particular way, and ignoring all the ones that contradicted those ways. And was pretty much told this is the only way to think about things, right? So that's indoctrination. So as I moved out of indoctrination and started doing my own self-education, doing my own research, my own studies, I slowly realized that that's what had happened. I got to the place where I realized I could think for myself about these things. And I strongly urge everybody, especially in this book, I talk about, don't believe anything because I do, or anyone else does, right? Oh, I believe this because Keith said it, or Brian Zahn, or Peter Enns, or N.T. Wright, or whoever, we need to decide for ourselves, I believe this because I believe it, right? Because I've thought it through, because I've done some research, because I've spent some time considering all of the information. But that even at the same time, what I urge us to do is not be too quick to stop thinking, to make up our minds. Like I say, don't let the cement harden. Let it hold loosely to the things you think you believe, whatever that is, because then you remain open to new information, right? Like, hey, I think this is where I am now, but I've been wrong before, and I'm probably wrong about some things now. I'll be wrong in the future. So I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to listen to other points of view. And so, anyway, my journey really through my personal deconstruction of my faith, I just reached a place where I realized that in addition to deconstructing my beliefs, my doctrines, my faith, that it's a good idea to deconstruct our need to be right about everything, and to deconstruct this illusion that we can be certain about things, certainly when it comes to faith. And by embracing that mystery, what I've discovered is, wow, there's so much more freedom in this, right? I don't have any fear, because I realize that I think if God is doing anything, God is inviting us into a universe of endless mystery. That it's a process, it's a journey. We're invited on an exploration of discovery, and it's not about the destination, right? It's about like Alan Watts talks about how, when you are dancing, you're not hurrying up to get to the end of the dance. No, you're just dancing because you enjoy the dance, right? The point of the dance isn't the end. It's the dance. And I think that's kind of what our lives are like. We're meant to just sort of live our lives to find meaning in the things that are meaningful. Anyway, that's a whole rambling answer to your question, but yeah, I guess, yeah, my journey has led me to a place outside of certainty. And I'm now at a place where I'm very excited about embracing the mystery and finding truth in many other places than the Bible or Christianity.
No, I really enjoyed that response because I can relate to it so much. And you work with people in the deconstructing community with your classes.
Yes.
Your square one, is that what it's called?
Yeah, square one. Yeah.
So I'm curious if do you see any patterns with people when they deconstruct? Do we have a tendency to just jump right back into certainty?
No, it's exactly right. And Melissa, that's exactly right. I mean, honestly, I could not have written this book had it not been for like the last 2.5 years, walking with groups of people through this deconstruction journey. So there's a square one community that lasts like 90 days, and there's a square two, and then now there's a square three, which is like just a weekly Zoom call. And so much of what is in this book came out of conversations that I had with people, hearing their stories, seeing them get set free from this need to be certain. So yeah, a lot of the ideas in this book really honestly came straight out of those experiences. Like, we tend to do that. Like, that's why I said, early on, I tell people in my square one group, deconstruct your need to be right about everything, because we get so much safety from thinking that our beliefs are true and we have it all figured out. We've been conditioned to do that. I mean, we can't help it, right? If you grew up in a Christian environment, that was the way you were told to behave and believe. And so we put so much comfort and safety and security in that. So when you start questioning those things, you feel uncomfortable, you feel unsafe, you feel anxious and scared. And it's a normal thing to like quickly jump to the next certainty, right? Well, if I'm not certain about this, what can I be certain about? Because what I think I need is absolute truth and absolute certainty. And so, but that's another mistake. You just jump to another thing, and then you defend that position. You become a fundamentalist about that belief, and you argue about how right you are and everybody else is wrong, until you figure out a few years later, or months or years later, oh crap, I'm wrong about that too, and I got to change my mind again. And so it just, after having observed that in myself and in other people so many times, it's like, yeah, don't do that. don't be so quick to make up your mind about something, right? And it's a process. It's not easy for people to do what I'm talking about, which is to learn how to become comfortable with mystery and even celebrate the beauty of uncertainty. Because again, there's so much anxiety and fear about that. Like, what do you mean the joy of uncertainty? Like, that doesn't sound like joy. That sounds like terror. That's horrific. How do I not know? So it takes a while to transition away from the need to be right about everything. What I'm trying to show in my book, systematically in the book, one thing after the other, is like how we can't really be certain about anything. I mean, forget theology. Our memories are not reliable. I talk about all this research that's been done about how our memories lie to us. So it's like someone said, it's like a Wikipedia page that we and other people edit constantly. And tons of research that backs this up, that we can't be certain about what we see with our own eyes, right? The human eye only perceives a very narrow band of light frequency out of the wide frequency of light, which covers all kinds of light we cannot even see with our own eyes. And the same with our ears and hearing, right? There's high frequencies we can't detect. There's low frequencies we can't hear, infrasounds. So we don't perceive reality as it is, and on so many levels. And so if we can't be certain about those things, about the world around us, our own brains, our own minds, the information we're receiving through our senses, then this idea of certainty is an illusion. I mean, maybe, yeah, it's a comfortable illusion. It gives you a level of comfort and security. But when you realize that it's not true, it isn't real, hopefully then that can help you realize that, yeah, that's not the place to get your security and your comfort from this illusion of certainty. That if reality really is this big, huge mystery, that's reality. And then that becomes the way that we can, if we can learn how to do that, we can actually learn to be comfortable not knowing, right? Realizing that God is way bigger than we could ever imagine. And that should give us comfort on at least one level.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, because as you stated, I think that a lot of the reason why people get so attached to their beliefs is because it gives them that sense of safety.
Uh-huh.
And so if we're telling people that we can't really know anything, like you're saying, we can't necessarily even trust our perception of reality. What can we know? Then where else could people learn to get that sense of safety and comfort from? And you mentioned, well, God is bigger than our ability to comprehend. So that should give us some comfort, right?
Right. Yeah. No, that's exactly, yeah. It's recognizing, right, this, hopefully I do this in the book. I tried anyway. When we base everything on our certainty, it's really more about us, like we're what's in the center of the circle. It's my certainty about everything, my beliefs, right? And how by operating out of that, the centrality of my beliefs, I'm making myself the standard for truth in the universe. In other words, I'm measuring whether someone is right or wrong based on what I believe, because I have convinced myself that what I believe is true, and I'm certain that I couldn't be wrong about that. And so if you are more progressive than me, I do the analogy of the George Carlin joke where he talks about how people on the freeway, if they're driving slower than you, they're a moron. They're faster than you, they're an idiot, right? Or they're insane. And so, but that's the same idea. We do the same thing in our theology in many other ways too. But what we're doing when we do that is we're saying whatever I'm doing is right and correct and normal because I'm not wrong. Therefore, everybody else is wrong, but based on how they relate to me and my definitions of what's true or right. And that sort of putting yourself at the center of the universe and making yourself the source of all truth in the universe is kind of screwy. I mean, to me, like, how do you get certainty from that? You're putting all your certainty back on yourself. Versus what I'm talking about is to say, well, no, if I'm not certain of anything, and because God is way bigger than I can comprehend, then God is the center of all that. God is the center of the universe, but it's still based on mystery, not on certainty. And so then I'm putting at least this idea of God, however you think about what God is, but God is the center of those things. And it's now I'm recognizing my relation to God. And so this is what I do in the book. I talk about a different way of knowing God. For Christians, knowing God has always been, in my experience, knowing God is about knowing the right information about God, having the right doctrines and beliefs. That's what we think it's about, knowing God. But Jesus has this crazy thing that he says in the Gospel of John that blows that away. It blew me away when I saw it. Jesus says, this is eternal life, that you would know God and his son, right, whom he sent. And the word for know there is not the Greek word episteme, which would be the word he would use if he was talking about information, having all the right, being right about who God is and what God is all about. But he doesn't use that word. He does. So he's not saying that eternal life is to have the right information, to know everything in your mind about God. The word for knowledge there he used, the word know is gnosko. It's the word you use to describe how a husband on his wedding night knows his wife and she conceives something, right? It's this scandalous, intercourse, this intimacy between two living beings, right? So between God and us, Jesus is saying eternal life is this gnosko, this knowing that isn't information. It's a knowing of an experience, a connection with the divine. And that, if we realize that that's what he's saying, then our shift is away from having it all figured out and more in the ways that we can experience the divine in our actual life. And there are many, many ways that we can do that. And I would even argue that we don't even all do it the same way. And so there's not one right or wrong way for us to have that kind of real, true experience of God in our life. I would just encourage us to find what those things are for ourselves and to begin doing those things, because I think that is really what we should be doing. That is the more of the direction I think we should be taking.
There's a couple of things that come to mind when you talk about that. The first is a point that you made in your book that you were just talking about, the difference between knowing God as in experiencing God and knowing God as in having correct facts and beliefs about God. And something that I found interesting since I deconstructed is that Christians specifically do seem to have a grasp of this in a sense, because they'll say things like, it's not a religion, it's a relationship. It's not knowing about God, it's knowing God through Jesus Christ. But yet, what a lot of people don't see is that what they're actually teaching is that in order to have that experience of God, you first have to have all the correct beliefs.
That's right.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, no, you nailed it, Melissa. That's exactly right. And then that's my problem with it, is that by putting that, that's not a small thing. That's not a subtle thing. That is huge. So for Christians to assert that in order to have a true connection and experience of the divine, creator of the universe, you first have to have the right beliefs about that. Like, that's ridiculous. That's just nonsense. And I can even say I know it from the sense of my own experience, because when I was very young, kindergarten, first grade, my family, we didn't go to church. We didn't read the Bible. I was not at a young age. It was not a Christian home. Right. And yet I would lay in bed at night and talk to God and have conversations with God. And I knew that I knew I was talking to, there was a God out there and I was talking to God. I had conversations with and experiences with God, dreams, all kinds of amazing things that happened long before my family ever actually attended a church. And then I walked forward and prayed the prayer and all that. So I know for a fact, even beyond that, like even if in that church environment, right? So, let's say there's a Sunday school class and there's a preschool class or even like a, elementary level class, and some little boy or girl, asked Jesus into their heart. Okay, great. Do you think if I gave them a test, a theology test, that they would be able to pass it? Like, explain the Trinity to me, explain penal substitution to me, right? A 5-year-old is going to be like, what are you talking about? So what Christians are saying is that until the kid can pass the test, they really can't know God. That's stupid. That doesn't even make any logical sense. And I know it doesn't make sense because if you talk to children, whether they're Christian or not, right? Many of them have this very childlike faith. Jesus even makes this point. He has this whole point that he says, unless you change and become like little children, you'll never see the kingdom. And the beautiful thing about children is that they're never satisfied. They have this relentless curiosity, right? But why? But why? But why? But why? And on one level, yes, that's that desire to know. But the thing about children is it's never satisfied. You can never give them an answer. They go, okay. But because they'll say, but what about this? But why that? But why is this? But why is this? And I think that's what we have to sort of like get back to is to sort of find, and Jesus, I think, is saying that, getting back to this relentless curiosity about things, that we don't have the answers, it's not figured out. And it isn't even really about having the answers as much as it's about maintaining that sense of awe and wonder and curiosity.